Welcome, night owls, to 2-Hour Horror Stories. I'm your host for the next 2 chilling hours. These aren't just bedtime stories, they're terrifying. Subscribe if you dare, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Now, silence your phone, close your eyes, and let the horror in. Todd never liked fishing alone, but when his brother canceled last minute, he figured a quiet weekend on Lake Merrow would be better than none. The lake was far off-grid, surrounded by thick pine and total silence. Perfect, he thought, to clear his head after a bitter divorce. He arrived Friday evening just before sundown. By nightfall, the lake was already swallowing sound.
No frags, no insects.
Just water lapping the old dock. He cast his line once before bed, not really expecting anything. The line tugged almost immediately, too soon. Startled, he reeled in fast. Empty hook. The bait was gone, but it hadn't felt like a fish. More like... The line caught on something heavy, unmoving, then suddenly snapped free. He checked the hook. It wasn't bent or damaged. Odd, but not alarming. He shrugged it off and packed up for the night. At 3:12 a.m., something tapped on the window of the lakeside cabin.
Top, top, top.
He sat up, heart knocking against his ribs. The curtains were drawn, and for a long second he didn't move. Then slowly he pulled them aside. Nothing, just the lake, silent and black as oil. The moon reflected off the water in an unbroken shimmer. The next morning he tried again. Cast out once, twice. On the third cast, the line snagged. Hard. His rod bent downward violently. Whatever it was big. Too big. He leaned back and reeled, the drag screeching. The line trembled, stretched tight like a wire. Then it went slack. He reeled in. Nothing. Except the hook was twisted now, coiled like a corkscrew. Something had gripped it. Something with force. He reached down to unhook it and paused. The hook was wet with something dark. Not fish blood. Thicker. Almost tar-like. That night, the taps returned. Louder. More insistent.
Top, top, top.
He didn't go to the window this time. Just lay there, still, pretending he hadn't heard. By morning, there were wet footprints on the porch.
Bare.
Human, leading from the dock to his cabin door. He didn't leave. He should have, but something about the lake pulled at him. He told himself it was stress or grief or loneliness. But it wasn't. It was the feeling that something wanted to be found. He cast out again that afternoon, eyes scanning the water. Nothing bit, until he reeled in. Something was already there. A note, wrapped carefully around the hook, folded, tied with damp red string. The paper was soft, like aged fabric, and smelled like mildew. He unfolded it slowly. 3 words. Shaky, uneven handwriting. Send it back. His stomach turned. He checked the tackle box. Everything looked untouched. He didn't know what it meant. He thought about packing up, just leaving. But the hook, when he went to replace it, was gone. The lid to the tackle box had been closed. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat with a lantern on, staring at the door. It didn't tap this time. It knocked. Once. Then silence. When the sun rose, he finally stepped outside. The footprints were back. This time leading away from the cabin. Back toward the water. The sand was disturbed, like something heavy had been dragged. He followed. The line from his rod was stretched out, still in the water, taut, as if something had just now bitten. He hadn't even touched it since yesterday. His hands shook as he reached for the reel. Slowly, gently, he turned the crank. Click, click, click. Something was coming in. The weight pulled hard, but steady. No thrashing, no jerks. Just pressure. When it surfaced, it didn't splash. It rose. A A burlap sack, stitched tight, waterlogged, tied to his line. He cut the line instantly, backed away, but the sack moved. It rolled slightly. From the inside, the stitching began to split. He ran, locked himself inside the cabin, pushed the couch against the door. But the line, it hadn't snapped. It had unhooked itself. By morning, the sack was gone. So was the line. So was the rod. And on the porch, the hook, clean, polished, placed carefully on the step. Inside it, looped through the metal, was another note. Too late. He left Lake Marrow without packing. Left everything. 3 weeks passed. Todd didn't sleep more than an hour at a time. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the clicking of the reel, the splash that never came. Then one night he woke up soaked in sweat. His fishing rod was propped against the corner of his bedroom. He hadn't brought it home. There was no note this time, no tap on the window, just a sound from the living room. Click, click, click. The reel was turning. By itself. He approached, frozen. The line was going out, slowly, as though something was pulling from the other end. He grabbed scissors, cut it. Silence. He collapsed to the floor, shaking. Then a whisper. From the wall. From the dark. A low, wet voice. I said, send it back. The line was whole again by morning. Coiled neatly, the hook gleaming. And Todd? He hasn't been seen since. But his boat was found last week. Floating in the middle of Lake Marrow. Rod in the water. Line pulled taut. And on the end of the hook, a single note. One more. The ice never cracked on Stillwater Lake. That was the first warning sign. Locals said it hadn't broken in over 30 winters, not even during freak warm spells. Scientists called it a geological anomaly. But the old families, the ones who'd been here since before the maps named the place, never walked the lake after January. They said it held secrets too old for thaw. Every February, one man always came anyway. Bryce Matthews, ice fisher, outsider. He didn't believe in small-town legends. Just knew the fish here were enormous, slow-moving monsters under the surface. Exactly the kind that sold for thousands back in the city. He pitched his tent directly in the center of the lake, marked by an old, blackened pine tree at the shoreline. Locals wouldn't even look toward it. The first night passed in silence. The second night, the whispering began. It wasn't wind. The sky was dead still, not a breath of air moving. But the voice came anyway, soft, shifting. It didn't speak in words, more like syllables unraveling underwater. Bryce ignored it until something tapped on the underside of the ice. Once, twice, 3 times. He crouched, staring into the hole he'd drilled earlier. The fishing line hung limp, untouched. But beneath the water something moved, slowly. He couldn't see it directly, only a murky shadow, long and narrow, coiling in the black beneath the frozen surface. He packed up early that night, but the whispering followed him, back to the cabin. It came from beneath the floorboards, through the pipes, inside his ears. He didn't sleep. In the morning, he returned to the lake out of stubbornness. Or maybe the thing beneath had already drawn him in. He cut a new hole deeper this time. The ice was thicker than it should have been, almost 20 inches. It smelled like iron and moss. The hook didn't even hit the bottom before the line went taut. He grinned, reeled in, and felt something pull back. Not a fish, not anything struggling, just weight, solid, intentional. He yanked harder. The ice groaned. He looked down into the hole. There was no water, just black, not the color, the absence. And from that void, something began to rise. Not fast, not in panic. It was waiting to be seen. A face, pale, translucent, eyes opened wide, unblinking, like a corpse that had never been pulled from the lake. Its mouth stretched impossibly wide, whispering without breath. Bryce stumbled back, pulling the hook free. Something was attached to it. Not a fish, not even close. A strip of fabric, molded, half frozen, peeled apart in his hand like wet skin. Etched into the fabric in scratches, not ink, were tiny symbols, spirals, eyes, runes. That night, the dreams began. He was underwater, looking up at the ice. Trapped. The whispering came louder, closer. He tried to swim, but something anchored him to the lake bed. And then a face appeared above him, looking down through the ice. It was his own, watching, smiling. He woke up choking on lake water. The sheets were soaked. His boots were gone. In their place, muddy footprints across the cabin floor, leading to the door and out onto the frozen lake. He followed. They were his, perfectly matched. But he hadn't left, not while awake. The next day, he didn't bring gear. He didn't fish. He just stood at the same hole, staring in, listening. This time, the whispers became words. Stay. Join. Remember. His nose began to bleed. He knelt beside the hole. Something was coming again. A hand. Fingers white and bone-thin. Nails like shards of black ice. It didn't reach out. It waited. Inviting. He turned away. Ran. Didn't stop until he hit the treeline. But even from there, he saw the hole begin to widen. By itself. The ice cracked in a perfect circle. Smooth. Silent. A shape rose out, half seen. Wet robes clinging to a skeletal body. Face veiled in strands of long, dark hair. It didn't chase him. It only pointed. Toward him. That night, he tried to leave town. His truck wouldn't start. Keys melted in his pocket. Melted. He stayed with a local woman who took pity on him. Gave him a couch. In the middle of the night, her toddler walked into the room. Eyes open, but not awake. He pointed at Bryce and whispered, "He's already under." The boy collapsed, nose bleeding. Bryce drove back to the lake the next morning. He didn't remember starting the car. Didn't remember putting his boots on. But he was standing at the center again. Same hole. No gear. Just the hook. He dropped it in. No line. No rod. Just the hook, and it caught. His arms moved without command. He pulled. A mirror rose from the water. Old wooden frame, carved with runes matching the ones from the cloth. Inside, his reflection grinned. But his mouth wasn't moving. The reflection spoke. "You came back," he screamed. Shattered the mirror. Inside the broken glass, he saw dozens of faces, screaming silently, their mouths all open wide. The whispers came again, louder, a tide of voices rising. "We wait below. Come see what you left." He ran one last time, or thought he did. Locals found his tent days later, empty, but the hole in the ice, still open, and beneath it something watched. Something waited. Every year since, at exactly midnight in February, the lake goes silent. The wind dies, the birds leave, and in the center of the frozen black, a small voice rises from the depths, calling for someone new. Come down. Eli was never the reckless type. Quiet, careful, maybe even paranoid, but never reckless. So when he jumped into the lake that night, fully clothed, without a word, something was wrong. 3 of them had gone out fishing: Eli, his cousin Sam, and their friend Rich. They'd grown up near Silver Pine Lake, a place rumored to be bottomless in spots and colder than snowmelt, even at the peak of summer. No one knew why. People said it was fed by underground rivers. Others claimed it was cursed. But it was always the quiet kind of haunted, unsettling, never dangerous. At least not until that night. The sky was overcast, and the moon blurred behind clouds. Still enough light to fish by. They were trolling slowly through the middle of the lake, the motor cut, just letting the current drift them. It was silent, not peaceful, though something heavier, like the lake was listening. Sam cast his line. Seconds later, a splash echoed across the water, off to the left. It wasn't a fish. Too large. Too deliberate. Rich laughed it off. Big catfish, maybe. You know they make sounds like that. But Sam didn't laugh. Eli stood up. No one said anything, but both Sam and Rich noticed the sudden shift in him. His eyes weren't locked on the water. They were wide, searching the darkness beyond the ripples, like he was listening for something beneath the surface. Another splash. Closer. Rich turned the flashlight toward the sound. Nothing. The water was perfectly still. Eli whispered something, too quiet to hear. Then he stepped to the edge of the boat. Sam grabbed his arm. "What are you doing?" But Eli didn't answer. He smiled. Not at Sam. Not at Rich. He smiled at the water. And then he jumped.
No hesitaschen.
The splash was sharp, loud. The boat rocked violently. The flashlight slipped and hit the floor with a dull clunk. Sam dropped to his knees, trying to find the beam, while Rich shouted Eli's name over and over into the black water. Nothing surfaced. Not a bubble. Not a ripple. Just silence. They called search and rescue at dawn. 3 boats.
Divers.
Drones. No sign of Eli. The lake wasn't even that deep in that area. Barely 20 feet. Visibility was poor, but not impossible. They found the weight of the anchor, an old soda can, and a snapped fishing pole. But not Eli. That night, Sam couldn't sleep. He kept hearing that splash. Not in memory, in real time, as if it was still happening. Over and over. At 2:47 a.m., his phone buzzed. One message. Unknown number. Gone after the splash. No punctuation. No context. He didn't reply. But the next night, same time. Another message. Still below. Listening. He blocked the number. 2 days passed. Then he found a wet footprint in his living room. One. Just one. Human. Bare. And dirty. Like it had walked up through mud and lakeweed. The couch was damp. Sam lived on the 3rd floor. That same day, Rich went missing. His boat was found adrift near the lake center. Rod snapped. Cooler untouched. Inside the boat was a note written in red ink across the underside of the seat. He smiled at me too. No one could explain it. No signs of foul play. Rich's keys were still in the ignition. By now, Sam had started to believe it wasn't over. He returned to the lake one last time. Not to fish, just to see it, to listen. He sat at the dock well past midnight. Nothing, until 3 a.m. sharp. A splash, then a voice, barely audible. Not Eli's voice exactly, but shaped like it. A broken mimicry. "Cold down here, Sam." He stood, scanned the lake, trembling. "You'll like it." He backed away. "The light doesn't come here." He turned and ran, and that was the last time he ever saw the lake. 2 weeks later, a boy fishing with his father found a waterlogged tackle box on the shoreline. Inside was a single hook tied to fishing line, wrapped tightly around a human molar. And beneath it, written on the inside of the lid in shaky, smeared letters, "Jump before the splash. It's too late after." They ran, reported it, burned the box. But every now and then, someone else hears it. A splash, from still water, then footsteps, then silence, and something grinning in the dark. Ben had fished since he was a kid, but there was something about Cragwood Pond that never sat right with him. It wasn't the water. It was too still, like it was holding its breath. Locals avoided it, said it was bottomless, said weird things happened out there. He didn't care. He just wanted a weekend alone. Quiet. No phone.
No noise.
Just him and the rod. He set up on the western bank, where reeds grew thick and the trees cast long shadows. The water barely rippled, not even from wind. That was the first thing he noticed. Cragwood didn't have wind. He cast his line, settled into his chair, and watched the red and white bobber drift lazily in the glassy water. An hour passed, then two. The bobber never moved.
No bites.
Not even a twitch. He changed bait, changed depth. Nothing. Then, as the sun dipped behind the trees, the surface shifted. Not a splash. More like something exhaled under the water. The bobber swayed once, then stopped again. Still. Exactly still.
Ben frowned.
Something felt off. He reeled in slowly just to check. Hook clean.
No weeds. No slime.
Like nothing had touched it at all. He cast again. The bobber landed with a soft plop and sat motionless.
No ripples. No drifting.
Ben watched it until the moon came up. Still, it didn't move. It wasn't natural. Water moves. Even dead ponds have insects, frogs, current. This one had a nothing. He camped a few yards from the edge. Sleep didn't come easy. Something about the bobber still being out there, unmoving, made him restless. At 2:38 a.m., he sat up in his sleeping bag. He didn't know why. Then he heard it. A soft click, followed by a drip. He crept back toward the pond. The water reflected the moon in a perfect, unbroken mirror. Too perfect. The bobber was still there, floating, exactly where he'd left it. He reached for the rod. The reel spun, just once. He hadn't touched it. It spun again. Click, then stopped. He backed away slowly, eyes on the bobber. No wind, no fish, no sound. Then he noticed the reflection of the trees in the water was wrong. They bent too far, like they were leaning in, smiling. He turned and went back to his tent. In the morning, the bobber hadn't moved. He watched it for hours. Then, without warning, something changed. The bobber dipped, just slightly. His heart jumped. Finally, a bite? He waited. It didn't twitch again, just floated there. Still, he reeled in, slowly, hands shaking.
No tensión.
When the hook came out of the water, it was gone.
No hook.
No line, just the end of the string, cut clean. He checked the reel. It hadn't snapped. It had been severed, straight through. He looked up. The bobber was still floating. But how? There was no line. It shouldn't be there. It hovered, weightless, exactly still. Ben stepped back. He left the pond for the day. Drove into town, tried to shake the feeling. Bought a new rig. Slept at a motel. But he couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, just before dawn, he drove back. He needed to see. The bobber was still there, floating. No rod attached. No line. Just waiting. Like it never moved because it never needed to. Like it was watching. He didn't go near the water again. Packed up and left before sunrise. But when he got home 2 days later, his front door was unlocked. Inside, everything was in place. Except one thing. His tackle box was open. And there, in the center of the living room floor, the same red and white bobber, perfectly dry, resting exactly still, not rolling, not moving, as if the house itself had no draft, no life. Ben tried to throw it out, took it to the trash, left it on the curb. The next morning, it was back on the kitchen counter, unmoving. He stopped fishing. But the bobber stayed, always somewhere new, on the pillow, on the dashboard, in the fridge, never rolling, never shifting, just there. Then came the dreams, dark water, a voice beneath, not a scream, something older, something drowned. It whispered his name, over and over. Ben, Ben. One morning he woke up choking, water in his lungs. There was no leak,
No rain.
just a puddle around the bobber, sitting on his chest. That day he drove back to Cragwood, threw it in, watched it float, exactly still, but this time it twitched, just once, and didn't stop. It dipped again, and again, like something below had finally grabbed hold. He turned to leave, but his car wouldn't start. The engine was dry, bone dry, every drop of oil and fluid gone. He walked. The woods felt closer now, trees pressing in. The path behind him, gone, just water, and at its center, the bobber, still, again, waiting. A week later, a ranger found the car, empty, gear still inside, no sign of Ben, but the fishing rod was gone, and floating in the middle of Cragwood, a single bobber, still, unmoving, unblinking, like it had never been touched, like it never would be, until the next one came. The fog came in faster than expected. Thick, cold, unnatural. Eli had been fishing since dawn, anchored just off the edge of Black Hollow Bay. Locals said the place was bad luck, but fish always bit near the drop-off, where the water turned black with depth. He didn't believe in curses, just currents and bait. When the fog rolled in, it swallowed everything. The trees on the shore vanished. The sun disappeared behind a wall of gray. The water stilled. Even the birds stopped. Then the voices started. At first, soft whispers, maybe wind. But there was no breeze. Just stillness. A hush so deep it made the lapping water seem loud. Help! Barely audible. Distant. Then gone. He scanned the fog. Nothing but white. He called out, uncertain. No answer. His radio crackled. Static, then a wet, garbled voice. Don't move. The signal cut. He reached to try again, but the boat shifted. A ripple. Then another voice, different, closer. It sees movement. He dropped the radio. Silence. The fog thickened. He couldn't see more than a few feet now. The edge of his own boat looked blurred, like a memory. A slow creak echoed from somewhere behind him, like a board shifting under weight. He spun. No one there. Then soft scraping beneath the boat. Metal on wood. He leaned over the edge. The water was still black, still calm. He waited. Seconds dragged. Nothing. Then a voice whispered right beside his ear. You're drifting. He jerked back. Nearly fell. The anchor line was still down, but when he checked it, it wasn't taut. It hung loose, as if it had been cut. He looked back up. A figure stood at the far end of the boat, tall, unmoving, shrouded in the fog. He stumbled backward, knocking over the tackle box. The figure didn't react. Then it slowly raised its hand, pointed to the water. Eli followed the gesture. Something floated up. The fishing bobber, red and white. Then another. Then a hand. Pale. Swollen. Fingers curled like claws. He recoiled as the hand sank back into the depths. When he looked up, the figure was gone. The fog grew colder. Breathing echoed from the mist, but not his own. It circled the boat. Inhale. Exhale. Ragged. Heavy. Then they always drift in alone, and they always listen. That's how it finds the way in. The voices overlapped, different tones. Men, women, children, all wrong, slightly warped like underwater recordings. The rod jerked. Line went taut. He grabbed it on instinct. Something pulled hard, too strong. He tried to let go, but the reel burned in his hands. The rod tip bent toward the water like it was being dragged in. A face broke the surface. Pale, hollow eyes, mouth wide open, gasping. Eli screamed and let go. The rod snapped forward into the lake. The face vanished beneath. Silence returned, except the whispers. Don't speak. Don't look. Don't breathe. He clutched the side of the boat, dizzy. Every breath steamed in the fog, but the fog didn't move. Not around him, like it was watching. A new voice now, familiar. His brother's. Eli. He froze. Eli, it's me. I need help. But his brother had drowned last year. Lake Valmir. Winter ice. No body recovered. He backed away. The voice came again, cracked and pleading. Eli, please. I'm cold. I'm so cold. Then softer. You left me. You let me sink. You watched me go under. He pressed his hands to his ears, shouted into the fog. You're not real. Then silence. No echo. Only a slow knock beneath the hull. Knock. 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 Then a breath. Right next to him. We were all real once. The boat rocked violently. Water sloshed over the edge. The fog thickened into shadow. The air smelled like rot and river stones. Then voices all at once. Dozens. Hundreds. A cacophony. She called first. He answered. We warned them. We're still warning you. The temperature dropped. His breath froze in the air. Then, a final whisper, low and clear, directly behind him. We only take those who listen. He turned. The boat was empty. He was alone, except for the fog, and the line, which began to reel itself in. Slowly. Click, click, click. Then the boat turned, without wind, without current, and started drifting back toward shore. But the voices, they stayed with him, inside. Every time he closes his eyes now, the fog returns, and they whisper again. You listened. Now you're part of the call. Soon, someone else will drift in, and you'll whisper too. Dylan had fished in Stillwater Bay every summer since he was 12. It wasn't a place people talked about much. Locals fished it, but tourists stayed away. It had a strange reputation. Not haunted exactly, just off. People said the water never rippled, no matter the wind. And no matter how many fish you caught, the lake never felt alive. He never thought much of it. Fish were fish, and Stillwater Bay had them. But this summer was different. The water was lower than usual. The exposed banks were cracked, dry, and littered with bones. Not human, he hoped. Just odd, pale remains, picked clean and scattered like something had rummaged through them. He told himself it was normal. Wildlife, coyotes, maybe raccoons. He set up on the dock like always. Same rod, same lure, cast once, twice, nothing. Stillwater usually bit quick. This time it felt dead. He was about to pack up when the line jerked. Not a nibble, a jerk. Hard. He tightened the drag and reeled in. Whatever he'd hooked wasn't heavy, but it fought wrong, shallow pulls, fast shifts, almost twitching. Not a fish. When it broke the surface, it didn't splash. It floated, round, slimy.
No scalds.
It looked like a fish at first, but its eyes were set wrong, and its mouth was open too wide, too round. Dylan stared. The thing stared back. Its eyes weren't glassy. They were present, watching. He backed up. The thing moved its jaw slowly, as if mimicking breath. Then it rolled, showing its underside. And there, Stitched crudely into the belly were letters. Burned, not inked. Sloppy. Ragged. Help! He dropped the rod. The thing sank slowly. The line went slack. He didn't sleep that night. Kept thinking about the eyes. The way it hadn't struggled. The way it had just come to him. The next morning he returned. He didn't know why. Maybe curiosity. Maybe guilt. The rod was still there. The line was already in the water. He hadn't cast it. He picked it up. It was light. Whatever had pulled it down was gone. He reeled in slowly. There was something on the hook. Otog. Plastic. Yellowed. Like one you'd find on a research specimen. There was faded handwriting. Specimen 3C, do not return. His stomach dropped. He didn't remember hooking anything like that. The tag fell apart in his hands, crumbling like wet paper. Stillwater looked the same. Flat, dead, calm. He cast again. The line danced, not tugged, danced, like something below was running its fingers along the filament. Gently, he pulled it in fast. Hooked again. Another fish, or what was left of one. Its eyes were missing, but its mouth opened as it surfaced. White, human-like. From within, tangled in its gills, a necklace dangled. A small locket, tarnished and cracked. He opened it without thinking. Inside, a photo of a child. A girl, smiling. Behind the picture, etched faintly into the metal. "Daddy, come home." Dylan staggered back. He didn't have a daughter. He'd never been married. But the face was familiar. Very familiar. His hands trembled. He dropped the locket into the water. It floated, then sank like stone. He left the bay that day. But that night his phone buzzed. An unknown number. He ignored it. Buzzed again. Same number. The third time he answered. Static. No voice. Then something deep, guttural, like a throat gurgling water. And then clearly, "Come back." The line disconnected. The next morning, he checked the dock. The rod was back in its place. Another fish on the line.
Nook.
Just stuck there, dead. His mouth was open. Inside the locket. Same photo. But this time the child was crying. And someone else was in the background. Him. Staring into the camera. Eyes wide. Mouth open. Like he'd been caught in the act of screaming. He had never taken that photo. He had never seen that girl. He hadn't returned since. But Stillwater Bay sends him things. Every week. Hooks in the mail. Polaroids of the dock. Close-ups of something under the water. And once, folded in a tiny envelope, a single fish scale. Under a black light, it revealed a single word. Soon. Now he keeps the lights on. Checks the sink before using it. Hears dripping even when the taps are dry. And sometimes, if he stares long enough into the toilet bowl, he swears he sees eyes, watching, just below the surface, waiting to be caught, again. Caleb was the last one out of the cabin that night. He always stayed up later than the others, claiming the stars helped him think. The lake was silent, still wide open under a moon so pale it looked carved from bone. No wind, no frogs, just the soft creak of the dock under his weight. He sat at the edge, bare feet skimming the surface, a beer in one hand, phone in the other. Notifications were rare out here. No service, no distractions. Just him and the lake. That's when he saw it. A ripple. Far out, too far to have come from a fish. It spread slow, a perfect circle, then vanished. He leaned forward, squinting. Another ripple. Closer. This one stopped just a few feet away. The water stilled. Then, with a sudden splash, something brushed his foot. He yanked his legs up, heart hammering. The water looked undisturbed now. Smooth, flat, reflective. Maybe a fish, maybe debris, but his foot stung. A thin red line bloomed along his ankle, as if scraped. Not a cut, a burn, cold and raised like a welt. He stood, muttered something to himself, and turned to go. The doc groaned as he stepped. Something grabbed his other ankle. Not a tug, a grip. It yanked with such force he didn't even scream. He hit the water face first, the bottle slipping from his hand, the phone vanishing into the dark. He clawed at the surface, eyes wide, bubbles erupting in panic. The doc moved away, or he did, dragged, hard, fast. Something pulled from below. Not hands, not claws, pressure, like ropes tightening, cold, invisible ropes. He kicked. Nothing. Couldn't break free. Couldn't see. Just black water above and darker shapes below. Then it stopped. He floated, suspended. For a moment, there was nothing but his heartbeat pounding in his ears. And then a sound, murmuring, soft, layered, like 100 voices whispering just out of range. Then came the cold, not from the water but from inside him. His skin tightened, his chest seized, his arms went limp. He saw it, just for a second, something with eyes, not glowing, not reflective, just open, watching, too many, too close. He woke up on the shore, alone, gasping. The sun was rising. The others were already calling his name from the cabin. He stumbled toward them, half frozen, lips blue. Couldn't explain how he got out. Couldn't explain the marks on his ankles. Too perfect, circular bruises like something had wrapped around them and pulled tight. They took him to the hospital. Ran tests. Everything came back clean. But he didn't feel clean. That night he didn't sleep. Not from fear but from need. An itch behind his eyes. A pressure in his chest. A pull. At midnight he returned to the dock. Didn't tell anyone. Just walked out to the edge. And stood there, listening, waiting. The lake responded. A single ripple. Closer this time. He stepped forward, then stopped. Something was resisting. His own body, as if part of him knew what waited. But it didn't matter. He sat down, legs dangling over the side. A second ripple, then a third, then a whisper. His name, soft, wet, Caleb. He didn't move, didn't blink, just watched. The water swelled, and from it rose a shape, a figure, featureless, pale, long-limbed, gliding toward him just beneath the surface. He reached out. The others found his footprints the next morning, leading down the dock, ending at the edge.
No splash. No drag marks.
Just stopped. His shoes were placed neatly at the end of the wood, side by side. But that wasn't what disturbed them. It was the water, still rippling, as if something had just slipped under. They called divers, search teams. Nothing turned up. No body.
No trace.
They stayed one more night before packing up. That's when Ava saw it. Across the lake, a silhouette, standing, knee-deep in the water, facing the cabin. She blinked. It was gone. 2 nights after they got home, Ava woke to wet footprints on her apartment floor, from the window to her bed. No sign of a break-in, nothing stolen, just the scent of algae and lake water in the air. She deleted every photo she had from the trip, but one wouldn't erase. A picture of Caleb, standing on the dock, except something's in the water behind him. Long arms, just beneath the surface, climbing up. She tried to throw the phone out. It rang before she could. Unknown number. She answered. Static. Then a voice. Low. Hollow. Come back. The photo changed. Now Caleb's eyes are open wide. his mouth too, as if caught mid-scream. She smashed the phone, burned what she could. But the dock, it returns in dreams now, endless, old, stretching out over still black water that never reflects the sky. Sometimes in those dreams she hears the splash. Other times she feels it, the cold grip, pulling, dragging. The old man at the bait shop didn't ask questions, just weighed the canister, muttered something about strange hours, and handed over the key to the rental boat like it was any other Saturday. Eric didn't say much either. He wasn't here to make friends. He was here because no one else would be on Hollow Lake this early, and that mattered. He paddled out just past the tree line, far enough that no one could see the shoreline through the fog. The water was motionless, heavy with the kind of silence only cold, deep places know. He reached into his cooler and opened the wrapped bundle. The bait was still warm. Not a fish, not worms, not shrimp, but soft, pale, human. He didn't look directly at it, just slid the hook beneath a fold of tissue, tried not to gag, and cast it deep into the still black water. The line barely made a sound as it sank. Minutes passed, then hours. The line twitched once. He gripped the reel, breath held. Then nothing. Stillness again. The lake undisturbed. He reached for the thermos. The surface of the water shimmered. Ripples moved against the wind. Something had shifted beneath him. He leaned over the boat, watching. Then the line jerked violently, almost pulling the rod overboard. He caught it just in time, hands burning as the reel screamed. Whatever had taken the bait wasn't fighting like a fish. Pulled in sudden, irregular bursts, not away but in circles, as if it was swimming around the boat. Then the tension vanished. Line slack. He reeled in slowly. Nothing on the hook. But the bait, what was left of it, was still there. Half-eaten. Not torn. Gnawed. Teeth marks. Human but wrong. Too many incisors. Impossibly spaced. He didn't rebate. Just sat there. The lake rippled again. He saw it. Just for a moment. A face beneath the surface. Not rising, not surfacing. Just floating a foot below the water, staring up through the ripples. Pale. Bloated. Mouth open too wide. Then gone. The line twitched again. This time he didn't move. He let it pull. Slowly, steadily, the rod bent again. The reel clicked softly, rhythmically, as something drew the line downward. He whispered to himself. Not prayer. Not fear. Something like apology. Then the boat rocked. Hard. A sudden weight on the opposite side. He turned too fast and saw it. Two hands gripping the edge. Gray. Bloated. Fingers with skin sloughing off. Fingernails cracked like old paint. Then the head rose. The face was familiar. That's when he screamed. It was Lena, or what used to be. Her eyes weren't open, but the mouth was. And from it something moved. Tiny, writhing shapes, like leeches, squirming from her lips into the water. Eric kicked, scrambling back, nearly tipping the boat. She didn't speak, just sank again, quietly. The line was still tight. When he looked at the hook, there was a new piece of bait, another scrap of flesh. Not his. He didn't know where it had come from. Then he felt his hand. Bit. Sticky. Blood. There was a cut across his palm he hadn't noticed. Deep. Clean. Too clean. Something had sliced him precisely, surgically. He tried to wrap it, but the bleeding wouldn't stop. Drip. Drip. Into the boat. Into the lake. The water below rippled again. Larger circles this time. Then dozens of smaller ones. As if something was surfacing, not one thing. Many. He tried to paddle. The oars felt heavy, like the water had thickened. That's when the whispers started. Under the boat. in the water, too muffled to understand. But the cadence was unmistakable. They were chanting, not English, something older, something that made his ears hurt. He reached for the line to cut it, but it was gone. The rod was gone, and so was the bait cooler. Only water now, and silence, except the boat was heavier, something beneath it, pressing up. He leaned over again, unable to stop himself. The water was black, but not empty. Eyes looked back. Hundreds, some human, some not, all wide open, watching, waiting. He screamed again. This time it echoed. From the trees, from under the boat. He jumped, dove into the freezing water, desperate to reach the shore. The lake did not feel natural. It pulled at him, not with waves, but with a kind of drag, like something gripping his ankles beneath the surface. He swam hard, felt fingers claw his side, teeth graze his leg, but he made it, collapsed on the muddy shore, coughing, bleeding, alone. When he looked back, the boat was where he left it. Still, empty, except it wasn't. The rod had returned, the bait cooler sealed tight, and the hook dangling above the surface. Waiting, he ran, all the way to the bait shop, burst through the door, raving. But the old man just looked at him, tired.
Sod.
Shouldn't have used real bait, he muttered. Eric froze. What? The old man nodded to the scars on his own hand. You feed them once, they don't forget the taste. Eric turned, ran again, never went back. But last week, the sheriff found that same rental boat, floating mid-lake, rod out, line taut, hook baited, not with worms, not with fish, but something human, and the water, still as ever. But if you listen closely just past dawn, you can still hear the whispers, waiting for another bite. They said old Dan never sat down while fishing. From the day he turned 50, he started going out to Mirror Lake every Sunday morning before the sun rose, standing straight on the deck of his little green boat, still as a statue, even in the heaviest fog. He'd stand for hours, rod in hand, eyes fixed on the water, never speaking, never blinking. People joked about it, said it was superstition, that he believed if he ever sat down, he'd stop catching anything. But those who fished near him noticed something else. He always caught something. Big catches, strange ones, catfish with scars across their heads, eels with milky eyes, fish that twitched for far too long after death. He never kept them, just stared at them for a moment, then slid them back beneath the surface. The weird part was no one ever saw him reel anything in. The rod would bend and the fish would just be there. No struggle, no fight, no sound. On the last Sunday he was seen, the fog was especially thick. The kind of fog that feels solid, like it has weight. His neighbor, Ellis, had come down to the dock around 5 a.m. to prep his own boat and saw Dan already out there. The little green boat, still as glass, with Dan standing in the center like always. Back perfectly straight, feet together, rod pointed downward into the water. Ellis waved. No response. Typical. He turned away. At 7:42 a.m., the boat was found drifting back to shore. Empty. Tackle box still sealed. Thermos upright. But no Dan. The weird thing, his boots were still on the deck, standing up, perfectly aligned. No scuffs, no splash marks, like he had stepped out of them. The rod was upright too, jammed into the wooden mount. Line taut, stretching downward into the lake. Divers searched the waters for 3 days, found nothing, until they pulled up the line. The hook was stuck, deep, not on a branch, not on a rock, on something soft, something that bled black. When they finally pulled it loose, A clump of fabric came up. Green fabric. Old Dan's coat. Torn at the collar. Threads frayed. The hook had pierced a patch of it, like it had been snagged on a body. But they never found the rest. After that, no one fished near the center of Mirror Lake anymore. Except for one kid. Liam, 17, reckless, didn't believe in ghost stories. He said if old Dan really sank while standing, maybe there was something to find down there. Something worth seeing. He took a rowboat out one foggy morning, stood on the edge like Dan, rod in hand, cast once, twice. Third time, the line jerked hard. No warning, no bite, just tension. He froze. The boat didn't move. The line pulled again, this time upward. Liam looked over the edge. Something was rising, not swimming, not floating, just lifting unnaturally. First a pair of boots, then legs, then a torso waterlogged, green coat hanging like skin. But the face wasn't Dan's anymore. It had no features, just smooth, pale skin, stretched like wax over a skull. No eyes, no mouth, no nose. Liam screamed, but the boat stayed still. The thing did not climb. It stood, in the boat, next to him, and Liam, he couldn't move, his legs locked. He stood there, eyes wide, rod dropping from his hands. The thing tilted its head toward him, raised one hand, water dripping from elongated fingers, and pressed it to Liam's chest, and pushed. The rowboat stayed balanced. But Liam wasn't there anymore, just his boots, standing, perfectly upright. Later that day, his father found the boat drifting near the dock.
No son, no esplas.
Just the rod, resting across the boat. The line pulled taut, the hook sunken deep into the lake again, and the boots, still warm. A week later, people began seeing the shape. Early mornings, just before the sun cracked the fog. A silhouette on the lake, standing, motionless. Only now it was taller. Some say it's a spirit. Others say it's the lake itself, taking what stands above it. But the oddest thing? There's no bottom to Mirror Lake. No maps ever charted it. No sonar returns make sense. Depths change daily. Sometimes it's 50 feet. Sometimes 300. Sometimes it doesn't return a signal at all. It's like the water decides how deep it wants to be. And lately it's been getting deeper. 2 more disappearances. Both fishermen. Both found with boats intact. Rods upright. Lines pulled tight. Boots left behind, still standing. And each time the fog grows heavier. Almost like the lake wants you to stop seeing the horizon. Wants you to step in. To cast your line. To stand. They say if you go out there now, you might see them. All of them. Not splashing. Not floating. Just standing. Under the water. Waiting. Everyone in Bracken Hollow fished. It wasn't a choice, it was tradition. Passed down like family names and worn-down cabins the lake provided, and you took what it gave. But no one fished near the western bend. Not since the drownings. Started decades ago. 3 kids, brothers, drowned on a calm spring day. Their bodies were never recovered. The only thing they found was a wooden tackle box bobbing along the shore, empty except for a single hand-carved lure, painted red. The lake was blamed, cursed, or both. People stopped going to that part. Not because of the deaths they claimed, but because of what came after. Fishermen started finding lures that didn't belong to them, perfectly set, resting inside their tackle boxes. Hooks sharper than razors, carved from bone, not metal. Some said they were gifts. Others called them warnings. But everyone agreed on one thing. They worked too well. Whatever bit them, whatever came up, wasn't like any fish they'd ever seen. Logan was one of the few who didn't believe the stories. A rational man, skeptical, logical. He saw the drowned brother's tale as just another piece of local folklore, until one morning, one of those bone lures appeared in his box. He didn't remember buying it, didn't remember crafting it, but there it was, smooth, pale, tied with old, fraying line. He should have thrown it away, but curiosity always bites harder than caution. He used it. The second it hit the water, the line snapped taut, yanked downward as if the lake itself had swallowed it whole.
No struggle. No drag.
Just one sharp tug, then slack. He reeled in. The lure was gone. In its place, a different one. Smaller, painted black, still carved from bone but older, cracked along the edges. He blinked, dropped it. It hissed where it landed, like it had just been pulled from boiling water. He didn't speak about it. Not at first. He tossed the lure into the woods and tried to forget. The next morning it was back in his box. So was another, and another. 24 hours passed, then 48. With each day, more appeared. They came in sets now, arranged neatly, meticulously, like someone or something had sorted them by design. Red, black, yellow, bone white. Some had teeth embedded in them. Others had tiny carvings. Scratched figures, stick-like and frantic, arms raised in what looked like screams. He tried burning them. They didn't burn. He sank them in cement. They returned. Eventually, he stopped using his own lures altogether. He couldn't even find them anymore. Only the bone ones remained. And no matter which one he tied to the line, something always bit. But he never saw what it was. Not once. Only shadows beneath the surface. Large, unfamiliar, moving in unnatural ways. He started dreaming about the lake. Dark, endless water. Faces just beneath the surface. Not swimming, waiting, watching. Mouths full of hooks instead of teeth. Eyes that didn't blink. Hands reaching, always just out of sight. He woke up gasping, tangled in his own bedsheets like netting. One morning, Logan found something new in his tackle box. A photograph. It was old, water-damaged, but visible. 3 boys,
Soaking wet.
smiling at the edge of the dock on the western bend. Their eyes were blacked out, burned through, like someone had pressed a cigarette into the photo. On the back, written in red ink, "You used what was ours." That evening he sat by the lake, not to fish, just to think. The water was perfectly still, silent, as if waiting. He reached for the box. It was no longer his. That much was obvious. It smelled like rot. The wood was swollen and damp, warped by years underwater. He hadn't noticed it changing, but it had. He opened the lid. Inside were exactly 3 lures. 1 red, 1 black, 1 white, all bone, all carved with the same jagged mark. An open mouth with 3 lines descending from it, like drowning figures. He picked up the red one. The hook pricked his finger. He bled into the tackle box. The lake rippled. He dropped the lure back in, backed away, but it was too late. The wind picked up, though none touched the trees. The water churned without sound. The line on his rod unspooled by itself. The red lure tied itself to the end. Cast. It landed. It sank. The rod bent. Whatever it was, it didn't fight. It rose. A face broke the surface. Not a fish. Not a person. Something in between. Its skin was gray-blue, eyes lidless and wide, hair drifting like weeds. Hooks pierced its cheeks, its lips, its brow. Lures hundreds, trailing behind like fins. It stared. Then it smiled. The rod slipped from Logan's hand. The thing beneath the water didn't move closer. It just whispered. Not words. Numbers. 3. Then 2. Then 1. Then, he blacked out. When he woke, he was alone. The tackle box gone. The rod snapped in half. His fingers were wet. Blood, but not his. Inside his boat, arranged neatly, were 3 more lures. Fresh, still warm, and carved into the seat next to them. Now you owe us. No one's seen Logan since. But his cabin lights turn on every night. And every morning, the fishermen find new lures in their boxes. Always carved from bone. Always shaped like screams. And every so often, someone catches something they never speak about. Then they disappear. But the lures stay behind. Waiting. Everyone in town knew not to fish near the bend in the Creston River. It wasn't superstition. It was survival. Stories said the river changed there. Slowed down. Got darker. Colder. Like it was holding its breath. People said it was cursed. That once you cast a line at the bend, you weren't the only one fishing anymore. Danny wasn't from town. He moved to Creston 3 weeks after losing his job and needed a place to restart. Cheap rent, quiet woods, and a river just a short walk from the house. It seemed like fate. The landlord warned him once, casually, not to go past the 3rd oak tree along the water. That's where it stops being river and starts being something else. Danny smiled politely. Old people always had strange rules. He wasn't about to let campfire tales scare him away from a good catch. It was the 3rd evening when he ignored the warning. The fish hadn't been biting, and he was determined not to go home empty-handed again. He walked along the riverbank until he reached the bend. The trees were taller there, more twisted. The water was still. Not a single ripple. It looked like black glass. He cast once. Nothing. Again. Nothing. On the 3rd cast, the line snapped tight the instant it hit the water. He grinned, heart pounding. But it didn't fight. It didn't pull. It held. Like something below was waiting for him to start reeling. He cranked the reel slowly, the drag whispering as the line returned inch by inch. There was weight, but not motion, not life. When it surfaced, it made no splash. A small wooden box. Rotten, bound in riverweed, tied to the hook. He hesitated, but curiosity always wins. He pulled it ashore, pried it open with the handle of his knife. Inside, a handful of black stones, and a photo. A girl, soaked, pale, standing ankle-deep in river water. The photo wasn't old. It wasn't aged. It looked like it had been taken that week. On the back, scrawled in water-blurred ink, "She waits." He dropped the box and stepped back. That's when he saw her, standing on the opposite bank, unmoving, watching, hair dark with water, dress clinging to her thin frame, skin gray-blue, not bloated, not rotted, just wrong. She didn't blink, didn't move. He stared back, breath caught in his throat. Then she smiled. Just a little, and walked slowly into the river. Not down, into, like the water parted for her. She vanished beneath the surface without a sound. The current didn't move. He ran. He didn't fish for days after, barely slept. But the river called. It always does. 6 days later, he went back. Not to the bend, closer to home. Safe water. Fast water. He cast once, twice. On the 3rd try, the line caught again. He froze. His reel refused to turn. Not because of weight, but resistance. Like the water itself was holding it in place. Then the line started reeling in. By itself. He let go. The rod jerked forward, pulled toward the water. He grabbed it before it slipped away completely. The river hissed. An unnatural sound. Like steam, like breath. And then, just for a second, he saw her again. Closer this time. On his side of the bank. Behind the trees. He turned and she was gone. That night, the photograph was waiting on his doorstep. Dry. No box.
No stones.
Just the photo. Except now her eyes were open, wider, staring directly into the lens. The back was blank this time. He burned it. He watched the flames twist the image until her face was gone. And yet, the next morning, the photo was back. Same girl. But now, she was closer in frame, barely shoulder up. Her skin was wet, her mouth slightly open, like she was about to speak. He tried to move, tried to leave Creston, but the car wouldn't start. The road out had washed over in the rain. The landlord didn't answer calls anymore. The river bend appeared in his dreams. Always still, always watching, and always she was there, standing at the edge, arms out, waiting. He stopped sleeping, stopped eating. Only the river mattered now, only her. He returned to the bend the following night, not with a rod, with bare hands. The river welcomed him.
No ripples.
No wind. She stood in the center now, half submerged, closer than ever. Danny stepped forward, shoes sinking into soft mud. She didn't speak, but something in his head whispered, "Come closer." He did, knee-deep now. The water froze his bones, but he couldn't stop. She smiled again, and slowly lifted her arms. In them a baby, gray-skinned, eyes sealed shut. His mouth opened without sound. Danny blinked, and the child was gone. She was empty-handed again. Now she was whispering, but her mouth didn't move. The words came through the water, deep and distant. Give back what was taken. He didn't understand. He turned to leave. She vanished beneath the surface once more. The current burst forward again, rushing, roaring. He stumbled out, soaked and breathless. In his pocket, a stone, smooth, black, like the ones from the box. Carved into it, a name. He doesn't fish anymore, but the river waits. And sometimes, in the middle of the night, he hears dripping on the floorboards. And when he checks the mirror, her face is there, behind him, smiling, still waiting. The lake was still. The only sound was the steady rhythm of the oars breaking the glassy surface, a deep thump echoing as they sliced through the water. For Marcus, it was a rare moment of peace. The cabin, nestled at the edge of Hollow Bay, was the perfect retreat after a grueling year of work. No one to bother him, no interruptions. Just the long stretch of water, the tall pines, and the quiet. He had planned the trip months in advance. It wasn't the first time he'd been to Hollow Bay, but it was the first time in years. The place had changed, yes, but it still held a certain charm, a calm that had eluded him in the city. The old wooden dock creaked under his feet as he loaded up the boat, the weathered boards shifting slightly as he adjusted his gear. He threw his bag into the boat, untied the rope, and pushed off into the stillness of the lake. There was no wind, no ripples. Even the birds had retreated into the trees, leaving the place silent except for the occasional croak of a distant frog. The water was dark, a deep, mysterious blue that seemed to swallow the light. His plan was simple. Row out to the center, cast his line, and see what happened. Maybe he'd catch something. Maybe he wouldn't. It didn't matter. The absence of noise, the absence of people was what he craved. The boat rocked gently as he rowed farther out. The water glistened in the late afternoon light, calm and unyielding. He glanced over his shoulder toward the shore, the cabin a distant blur in the trees. Then he turned back to face the vast, open water. No one else around, just him, and the lake. It wasn't until he was nearly a mile out, past the usual fishing spots, that he noticed it, the strange shape in the water. It didn't make sense at first. There was something unnatural about it. At first, Marcus thought it was a piece of driftwood or maybe a log that had sunk halfway into the water. But as he drew closer, it became clear. The shape was moving. And it wasn't natural. It wasn't a log. His heart skipped a beat. It was a boat. But it wasn't his boat. The wooden hull, cracked and worn, bobbed gently in the water. There was no one aboard. No one at all. The boat was empty, drifting slowly, almost as if it had been waiting for him. His curiosity took over. Despite the sinking feeling in his stomach, Marcus rowed toward the boat. His oars cutting through the water faster now, the rhythmic sound of their stroke turning into a sharp, anxious beat. As he got closer, he could see more details. The boat had clearly seen better days. The paint was chipped and peeling, the wood weathered and warped. But it was the sight of the small, tattered rope hanging over the side that made him hesitate. The knot was tied off, tight, as if it had been anchored to something or someone. But there was no sign of struggle. Nothing to indicate why it had been abandoned here, floating alone. Marcus reached out and grabbed the rope, his fingers brushing against the damp fibers. A chill crawled up his spine. He looked around again, but the lake was as silent as it had been when he first set out. The boat didn't move as he pulled it closer. It just sat there, empty, waiting. Then something strange happened. The oars in Marcus's boat began to move by themselves. He jerked back, almost falling overboard. His heart raced as he glanced at the oars, but they were still unmoving. He breathed heavily, telling himself it was just the wind. There was no wind.
No gust.
The lake was still, but the feeling in the air had shifted. His gaze turned back to the boat. It was now just a few feet away. Marcus reached over, grabbed the edge of the other boat, and pulled himself aboard. His hands shook. The boat creaked under his weight as he stepped inside. The eerie silence enveloped him. Everything about the boat felt wrong. The inside was bare, save for a single item, a black fishing hat, perched on the edge of a rotting seat. It looked almost waiting for someone to pick it up. A cold gust of wind brushed past Marcus's neck, but when he turned, there was no one there. Only the trees lining the bay, their shadows stretching long across the water. He hesitated for a moment before his curiosity pushed him forward. He picked up the fishing hat, examining it. It had the smell of stale water, of mildew. It had been there for a while. As he examined the hat, a low sound reverberated through the boat. A thump, then another. The water beneath him shifted. His breath caught. There, at the bottom of the boat, just under the seat, something shifted. The floor of the boat began to crack. Slowly, cautiously, Marcus leaned down, his fingers brushing against the cracked boards. The sound of something heavy shifting beneath him filled the air. A thick, wet smell began to rise, and the shadows around him seemed to deepen. He leaned closer, heart hammering in his chest. The crack in the floor opened wider, revealing something slick and shiny in the darkened space. It was a hand. Not a fish's fin, not a branch, nothing natural. A human hand. A bloated, waterlogged hand, pale as moonlight. Marcus recoiled, stumbling backward. But as he did, his foot brushed against something else, something harder. He looked down in terror. A foot in a tattered boot. It was then that he realized something chilling. The boat wasn't just drifting. It was pulling him in. Suddenly, everything around him shifted. The water seemed to rise, swirling with unnatural force. The boat lurched forward, as if propelled by something beneath the surface. He tried to get out, tried to jump into his own boat, but his legs wouldn't move. His body felt paralyzed, locked in place. The water around him began to churn, the sound growing louder. Then the voice came, faint at first, just a whisper over the wind. But it grew louder, more insistent, a voice that echoed from deep beneath the surface. "Take it back," the voice said, rasping, wet. "Take it back, or stay." The boat began to rock violently, as if something or someone was trying to climb aboard. He reached for the oars, but they had vanished. The water churned, rising higher, swirling around him. Something broke through the surface of the lake, sending a cold splash into his face. Marcus screamed, but no sound escaped. The water closed over his head. And when the boat returned to Hollow Bay later that day, it was still empty. Not a single mark of his presence remained. The morning had started like any other. Bill, a seasoned fisherman, had woken early, like usual, and made his way out to the dock of Lake Ashford, a remote body of water known for its deep, dark mystery. It wasn't on many maps, and locals steered clear, but for Bill, it was the perfect place to escape the noise of the world. The lake was calm this morning, its surface glassy, reflecting the rising sun like a perfect mirror. Not a ripple disturbed the stillness. Bill knew the lake had a reputation. It was old, and locals told stories, tales that they only half believed, but still spoke about in hushed voices after a drink. They said the lake was cursed, that something lurked beneath, something ancient, but Bill had heard it all before and dismissed it. He wasn't superstitious. Fishing was about patience, skill, and a quiet mind, not ghosts and myths. Bill was there to fish, to forget, to think. He cast his line and let the bait sink into the water. The rod curved slightly, then sat still. The usual quiet, birds on the shore, the occasional splash of a fish jumping far off in the distance. Bill closed his eyes, savoring the solitude. A sharp tug snapped his attention back to the line. A heavy pull, not the subtle nibble of a small trout, but something more substantial. A fish, definitely. He gripped the rod tightly and began to reel in, expecting a battle. His heart raced with excitement, but his instinct told him something was off. This wasn't a typical fish. The line pulled against him harder than he expected, making his hands sweat as he struggled to maintain control. He leaned back, bracing his feet against the dock to steady himself, but the force continued to increase. Something was down there, and it wasn't giving up easily. He pulled again, harder this time, and the weight on the line shifted. Just as he thought he might pull whatever it was to the surface, the rod jerked violently. A snap. The line went slack. Bill's heart thudded in his chest. He stared at the rod, confused. He hadn't lost a fish that big in years. He checked the hook. Still there, but the bait was gone. Something had taken it, something far stronger than the usual lake dwellers. But as he was about to reel in the line, he felt it. The water beneath him, the deep stillness of the lake. It had changed. He hadn't noticed it before, but the quiet had turned thick, heavy. The air felt dense, almost suffocating. He felt a slight tug on the line again, but this time the pull was different. Slow, deliberate. It wasn't a fish. Not in the way he knew. It was something else. His skin crawled, his fingers gripping the rod tighter. He didn't want to admit it, but a chill crept down his spine. He wasn't alone out there. Something was watching him. He cast again, trying to shake the feeling, trying to focus on the task. But the moment the line hit the water, the silence around him deepened. There was no breeze. The birds had stopped singing. Even the sound of the water lapping against the dock seemed distant. The rod jerked hard, again, but this time it didn't stop. The line continued to pull, unyielding, as if whatever was on the other end wasn't just fighting. It was dragging him in. He leaned back, his muscles straining against the pressure. The water beneath him swelled, rippling in slow, deliberate waves. He couldn't stop the line from going deeper, the tension building as something below the surface moved. Then he felt it. Something moved underneath the boat. A large, slow shift in the water. A change in pressure, like something massive was circling beneath him. He froze. His breath caught in his throat. His heart pounded so loudly he could hear it in his ears. The boat rocked slightly, the ripples from below disturbing its steady position. Bill didn't dare look over the side of the boat. He couldn't. He knew something was there. Something big. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the pull stopped. The line went slack again, the tension gone. The water settled. Bill slowly, carefully, reeled in the line, his eyes scanning the water, his muscles tense. He expected to find nothing. Maybe a broken line. Maybe nothing at all. But when the hook broke the surface, there was something on it. A single, black-scaled fish. Its body glistened strangely, like oil on water. Its eyes were too large, too round. The pupils were dilated, nearly black, giving it an almost human quality. Bill's stomach twisted, but there was more. Wrapped around the fish's body, tied in knots of scale and sinew, was something else, something strange. A trail of mud-covered rope, slick and twisted, wrapped around the fish's body like a shackle. He pulled the fish closer, examining the rope. It didn't belong in the lake. It was wrong. But before he could get a better look, the fish suddenly twitched, its body contorting in an unnatural way. Bill stumbled back in shock. He dropped the rod, the fish flopping violently against the dock as though trying to free itself from the line. Splash! The fish broke free, diving back into the water with a speed Bill couldn't track. It disappeared beneath the surface, vanishing into the depths of the lake with an eerie silence. For a moment, Bill stood frozen. He didn't know what had just happened. His heart was racing, his breath coming in quick, shallow bursts. The line was gone now. The fish was gone. But the feeling, the presence beneath the water remained. Bill didn't speak. He couldn't. He just stood there, staring at the lake, unable to tear his gaze away from the water, knowing that whatever had swum under him wasn't just a fish. It wasn't even alive in the way he understood. Something in the lake had been waiting for him. Something ancient. Something far older than the fish. The rope tied around the fish was the final clue. The thing that sent a chill crawling down his spine. The line had been a warning of something far worse waiting beneath the surface. It was only then that Bill realized. The lake had been calling to him all along. But he didn't understand the call. Not yet. And when he turned to leave, the water shifted once more. The ripples from below the surface moved toward him, slowly, almost purposefully. Something was still down there, and it hadn't finished with him yet. Marcus had always been fond of fishing. He found solace in the stillness of the water, the repetitive motion of casting and reeling in. The way time seemed to slow down the moment his lure hit the surface. It was his escape, away from the noise of the world, away from his job, his responsibilities, his fractured family. Fishing was where he could forget. He had decided to make the trip to Pine Hollow Lake that weekend. It was an isolated spot, perfect for someone like him who needed to escape. No one ever came here. It was just him and the water. The lake wasn't huge, but it was deep, fed by mountain streams that ran off in hidden places. The local legends surrounding Pine Hollow were plentiful. There were whispers of strange occurrences, of things lurking beneath the surface, things that shouldn't be there. But those were just stories, old wives' tales passed down through the generations. He didn't believe in them. That Saturday morning, the sun was barely up when Marcus drove up the narrow path to the secluded camping site near the lake. He set up his tent, organized his gear, and quickly made his way down to the water. The early morning fog had just begun to lift, and the lake was shrouded in a thin mist that made it look otherworldly. He smiled to himself, thinking how lucky he was to have this place all to himself. The water was still, almost too still. He cast his line into the lake, watching the lure disappear into the deep. He waited. Minutes passed. The only sound was the occasional ripple from the gentle movement of the water. Then he felt it. The tug was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. A slight pull on the line. He didn't think much of it. Could have been a small fish or just a snag. But as he began to reel it in, the tug turned into something more persistent, something that fought against him, pulling harder with each turn of the reel. Marcus stopped. He had been fishing long enough to know the difference between a big catch and something wrong. This wasn't a fish. There was no darting, no sudden pull, no fight. Just a steady drag. A weight, something heavy, sluggish, like it didn't want to be caught. He gave the line a quick yank, but it wouldn't budge. Whatever was on the other end was anchored deep. He reeled in harder, and that's when he noticed it. The line wouldn't cut. It wasn't just that it was tangled. It was as if the line had fused with something under the water. Something living. A sudden panic surged through him. He pulled with everything he had, the tension mounting. His hands began to shake. Sweat dripped from his forehead, stinging his eyes. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the line went slack. Marcus exhaled sharply, staring at the water. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. He checked his reel, inspecting the line. It was intact, but he could have sworn that the tug had come from something large, something not of this world. For a moment, he wondered if he was just imagining things. Maybe it was a log, or a particularly stubborn fish. But the way the line had fought him, it didn't feel natural. The weight, the resistance, it was too much. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. It was just a freak occurrence. He cast again. But this time he kept his eyes fixed on the water, watching, waiting. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him, waiting for him to make the next move. And then, just as the line hit the water, he heard it. A soft, rhythmic thumping sound. At first, he thought it was his heart beating too fast. But no, this was a different sound. It was coming from the lake. His mind raced, trying to place the noise. It sounded like something was tapping against the hull of a boat. Steady, methodical, slow. He turned around. No boats in sight. The shoreline was empty. His eyes returned to the water, his pulse quickening. The thumping continued, louder now, almost as if it was beneath him. Marcus felt a chill crawl up his spine. He reached down and grabbed his fishing line, pulling it in slowly, cautiously. As the line came closer to the surface, he saw something strange. The water was moving, but not in a way that made sense. It rippled in unnatural patterns, almost as if something beneath was shifting, adjusting its position. His eyes widened when he saw it. There was something tangled in the line. Not a fish, not a log, but something darker, slick and glistening. It was a hand. Not a human hand. No, this hand was far too large, far too grotesque. Its fingers were twisted, elongated, covered in strange blackened scales. It gripped the line, holding on with unnatural strength. Marcus stumbled back, his breath coming in short gasps. The thumping sound stopped. All was silent. For a long moment, Marcus stood frozen, staring at the hand beneath the surface, trying to convince himself that he was just seeing things. But no, the hand was real. It was there, and it was pulling on the line again. Without thinking, Marcus jerked his rod, trying to free the line, but the hand wouldn't release. He reeled in harder, and as the line tightened, The hand seemed to pull back, as if resisting him. But then, something far worse happened. The hand let go. Not in a way that made sense. It didn't fall away or slip off the hook. It unraveled. The line snapped back like a whip, and Marcus watched in horror as the hand, disjointed and twitching, slipped beneath the surface of the water. The once sturdy fishing line now trembled in his hands, and something in the water shifted, moving closer. The line was still attached. Marcus tried to cut it. He grabbed his knife, trembling with fear. The blade pressed against the taut line, but no matter how hard he sawed, the line wouldn't cut. It didn't fray, didn't snap, didn't give way. The blade slipped off as though it was cutting through something solid. The line was alive. He backed away, his breath shallow. His heart pounded. He dropped the knife, his hands trembling, and stumbled back toward the shore. But the line didn't stay still. It began to move on its own, as if pulling itself back into the water. Marcus turned to run. But then, from the water, something rose. The line tightened. It had reformed, coiled like a snake. And at the other end, a shape, something massive and dark, emerging from the lake. He didn't see it clearly. He didn't need to. The last thing Marcus heard was the snap of the line breaking free from his hands. It was the last sound he would ever hear. It was the kind of night where everything seemed wrong. Unnaturally still, the air too cold even for early fall. Ben sat in his old, battered boat, drifting quietly in the middle of Blackwater Lake. He should have known better than to fish tonight, but something had drawn him out. He had fished here hundreds of times before with no incident. It was always calm, always predictable. Or so he thought. He hadn't seen the moon all evening. Not a single sliver, not even a faint glow. The sky was an endless black canvas. No stars, no moonlight to break the darkness. Ben tried to dismiss it, telling himself the weather had just kept the moon behind the clouds. But there was something about it, the way the darkness stretched out around him, swallowing the boat, the water, the very air. The silence was more oppressive than it should have been, as though the world had forgotten to breathe. He cast his line out slowly, the ripples from the bait barely breaking the glassy surface. He had no expectation of catching anything. He hadn't even prepared properly for a night of fishing. But the pull of the lake had been too strong to resist. The stillness felt as if the lake itself was waiting for him to break it, as if it demanded he pay attention, do something, anything. The rod tip dipped once, then again. He hesitated, unsure of whether it was just the weight of the line or something more. It dipped again. He jerked the rod back, reeling in the slack, his fingers numb from the cold. There was resistance, but it wasn't the smooth pull of a fish. No, this was something different, something deeper, heavier. He tightened his grip, pulling harder, expecting the fight of a sizable catch. But the pull didn't give. It just held. The water around him remained eerily calm. Not a splash, not a ripple. The line didn't tug or snap. It just held. Something was down there, something far beyond the reach of his line. Ben's heart started to race as the tension grew, each moment stretching into eternity. The line continued to pull impossibly heavy. His hands shook, but he refused to let go, despite the growing dread that crept into his gut. What was down there? What was so strong that it could pull a man's line to the very limits of its strength? Then there was a sound, not a splash, but a soft, gurgling murmur. It came from beneath the boat, not the usual sounds of water lapping at the hull, but something deeper, a sound that seemed too far away to be real. It wasn't just water, it was a voice, muffled, as if coming from the depths of the lake itself.
Ben froze.
His breath caught in his throat. The voice, soft, unintelligible, almost like whispering, began to grow louder, clearer. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. The language it spoke wasn't one he recognized, but the tone. The tone was unmistakable. It was pleading, begging. But for what? A sudden tug jolted him back to the line. The water beneath the boat splashed violently, and he was yanked forward, struggling to keep his balance. His grip tightened on the rod, panic rising in his chest. The voice, it was getting louder. The lake seemed to be alive now, the water swirling beneath the boat, pulling in every direction, tugging at his mind. The rod buckled again. This time, there was no resistance. The line snapped free with a sharp crack, and Ben's hands were pulled from the reel, his knuckles bruised. Everything went still. The lake, the boat, the air. It was as though time had paused, holding its breath. And then the voice came again, not from below but from behind. Ben spun around, his heart pounding in his ears. Nothing. The boat was empty. The water was still. There was nothing but the endless expanse of night around him. But something was wrong. The shadows were moving. Not the shadows of trees or the ripples of water, but the shadows in the water. As if something just beneath the surface had shifted, unsettling the very foundation of the lake. He heard the gurgling again, followed by the voice, closer now. So close, it felt as though it was standing right next to him. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a hiss, a breath, command. He tried to reel in the slack. His hands were slick with sweat, his arms trembling, but the reel wasn't moving. The line refused to budge. The surface of the water around him shimmered. No, rippled, as though something was stirring beneath the surface. His rod bowed, as though under the weight of something massive. With a sharp gasp, Ben jerked the line free from the reel. The water exploded. A massive splash sent waves crashing over the boat, and Ben was thrown backward, nearly losing his grip on the boat's edge. Something heavy collided with the bottom of the hull. He scrambled to stay in place, fear gnawing at him, his heart racing so fast he could barely breathe. He gripped the sides of the boat, trying to steady himself, but the water kept swirling, pushing him in different directions. And then, between the crashing waves, he saw it. A shape rising slowly from the water. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dark, yellow, unnatural. Its silhouette was unlike anything he had ever seen, distorted and shifting in the water, too large to be any fish he knew, too monstrous to be anything natural. The shape was humanoid, but bent, broken, twisted. It had the form of a man, but something was wrong. Its arms stretched far too long, its body too thin, its head too large, and its features too sharp. Ben couldn't look away, his mind screaming at him to run, but his body betrayed him. He couldn't move. He was frozen. It rose slowly, gliding upward like something from a nightmare, its body twisting, writhing in ways that shouldn't have been possible. The voice hissed again, its language incomprehensible, but the tone was unmistakable, demanding, insistent. Ben finally broke free from the trance, his legs trembling as he scrambled for the oars. His fingers fumbled, but somehow he managed to row the boat away. As he pulled, the boat seemed to be weighed down, as though something was still attached beneath, holding him there. The water splashed around him, but he kept rowing. The lake, the thing, everything screamed at him to stop, but he didn't. The voice became louder, more desperate. It echoed in his ears, all around him. Come back. He didn't stop. The boat creaked as he rowed faster, harder, pushing through the waves. But the voice, it followed him, crawling along the edges of the water, from behind, from beneath. He couldn't escape it. And then, Just as he thought he was finally free, the boat lurched forward. The oars slipped from his hands as the darkness consumed him. The lake was silent once again. Ben's boat was found the next morning, still adrift, floating aimlessly in the middle of the lake. There was no sign of Ben, no struggle, no sign of anything unusual, except for the fishing line, stretched taut and twisted unnaturally beneath the water's surface. The moon still hadn't risen. The sun hung low over Blackwater Lake, casting long shadows across the still water. James had always loved this lake, even if it was notorious for its strange history. For years, he had heard the whispers, stories about the fishermen who disappeared, the ones who cast their lines and never returned. But those were just stories. James wasn't the superstitious type. He was here for one reason and one reason only, to prove to himself that he wasn't afraid. This trip was supposed to be his last before the weather turned. The water was colder now, a chill in the air that promised the arrival of winter. He stood at the edge of the dock, feeling the wood creak beneath his boots. The lake looked almost peaceful, but there was a heaviness to it, like the land itself was holding its breath. James didn't mind. He liked the quiet, the solitude. It was why he came here every year, to escape the noise of the city and clear his head. The stress of his job, the pressure from his colleagues. It all melted away when he was here, standing alone in the silence of Blackwater. He set his tackle box down beside him and pulled out his rod. The air was crisp as he untangled the line, flicking the reel with a practiced hand. The lake stretched out in front of him, the water so still that it looked like glass. He was the only one around, just like always. He cast his line. The lure sliced through the air before splashing softly into the water. He felt the tension in the rod as the line straightened, the bait sinking slowly into the depths below. The evening passed in a quiet rhythm. Cast, wait, reel in, cast again. The sun was nearly gone now, dipping below the horizon. The lake seemed to darken with each passing minute, and James, in his usual fashion, didn't notice the change in the atmosphere. He had long since learned to ignore the stories, to dismiss them as nothing more than local folklore. Yet tonight, something felt off. It wasn't the lake. It wasn't the weather. It was the feeling in his gut, the one he couldn't quite shake, the one that told him he shouldn't have come. Still, he cast again, not wanting to admit that he felt it too. The strange tension, the unease. The lure landed with a quiet plop, but when James tugged the line to reel it in, there was resistance. First, he thought it was a snag. The bottom of the lake was filled with rocks and fallen trees, a known hazard for anyone fishing here. But this wasn't a snag. The rod bent sharply, the line stretching taut, but it wasn't a fish. No, this was something heavier, something bigger. He felt it tug once, then again. James grinned. A big one, maybe even a monster. His pulse quickened, the excitement taking over. He pulled back on the rod, trying to reel it in, but whatever was on the other end wasn't cooperating. It fought back, dragging the boat further out into the lake. James gritted his teeth, tightening his grip on the rod. The line started to hum, the tension unbearable, and still he didn't stop. It wasn't until the boat lurched that he finally paused, a sinking feeling in his chest. The water was too still, too quiet. He glanced around, but there was no one. The trees stood silent on the shore. The world seemed to be holding its breath. He tugged again, harder this time. The rod bent nearly in half, and for a moment he thought the line would snap. But then, just as quickly as it had started, there was a sudden slack, as though whatever was on the other end had let go. James reeled in quickly, heart racing. The rod was almost vibrating in his hands. He pulled the line in hand over hand, desperate to see what he had hooked. As the bait finally neared the surface, he saw it.
Onoit.
The line was tangled in a thick, wet knot. But that wasn't what made his stomach flip. What made his breath catch was what was tangled in it. A hand. A long, thin hand, wrapped in rotting fabric. The fingers were skeletal, grayish-white, the skin stretched too tight. They clung to the line as though they were still alive. James's heart pounded in his chest as the horror slowly sank in. The line didn't move, didn't slip through his fingers. He tugged once, twice, trying to free it, but the hand didn't let go. Instead, the fingers curled around the line tighter, pulling it deeper into the water. It was then that James saw it, a shape beneath the surface. At first, he thought it was just the reflection of the boat, but the shadow moved, slithered. It darted beneath the boat like a dark, formless creature. The water around the boat rippled violently, the surface churning as if something was rising. The boat jerked forward again, dragging the rod with it. James stumbled to his feet, panic flooding his chest. The line snapped taut once more, but it wasn't the hand anymore. Something else had taken its place. Something much, much larger. It was as if the water itself had come alive, pulling him toward the edge of the lake. His legs shook as he backed away, pulling the rod in with shaking hands. But it didn't matter. Whatever it was beneath the surface was getting closer. Closer. Then a voice. Low, guttural, barely a whisper, but unmistakable. The last cast. James froze. The voice came from the water, from the lake itself, but there was no one around to say those words. His heart slammed against his ribs, his hands shaking uncontrollably as he felt the water shift beneath him, as though the lake were stretching, expanding. And he knew in that instant that it wasn't just a voice. It was a warning. The rod jerked from his hands, yanking violently as though the lake itself had claimed it. The line spiraled out, the lure spinning through the water like something alive, like something desperate to escape. He couldn't fight it. He couldn't reel it in. The boat was pulled deeper into the lake, the shore slipping farther away. The whisper came again, louder this time, thick with malice. The last cast, forever. James fought to stay in the boat, to hold on, but it was no use. The lake was swallowing him whole, pulling him under, pulling him deeper and deeper into the darkness. And the last thing he felt was the cold, unforgiving water closing in around him. By morning, the boat was found, empty, but the fishing rod remained, its line tangled in something below the surface. And the lake, it was still, silent, waiting. The summer sun hung low, casting a thick, golden hue over the still waters of Lake Wren. The air was warm, the kind of warmth that clings to your skin, heavy and suffocating. Carl hated it, but he was here for the peace and quiet, something he hadn't had in years. The city had a way of eating him alive, pulling him in with its noise, the constant hustle, the faces that never seemed to stop moving. Lake Wren, nestled deep in the forest, offered him something different, a chance to breathe. He was alone on the boat, a modest 12-footer, a relic from his grandfather. The motor puttered along, leaving a trail of ripples behind him. The lake was narrow, winding between thick banks of reeds. Carl had fished this lake before, but it had been years since he'd last visited. The silence was almost unnerving, too perfect, too still. He cast his line, the bait splashing into the water with a soft plop. He pulled his hat down lower and settled into the boat, waiting. The sun beat down, but the heat didn't bother him, not at first. It felt almost like a blanket, wrapping him in an illusion of calm. Minutes passed, Then an hour. Nothing. His line remained still, unmoving. He should have been used to it by now. Fishing was all about patience, but today, there was something gnawing at him. He couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It wasn't the birds, there were no birds in sight. It wasn't the wind, there was none. It was something deeper, something primal. He tried to dismiss the thought. It was just his mind playing tricks on him. But it didn't go away. The feeling only grew stronger. Carl shifted in his seat, glancing over the side of the boat, his eyes scanning the reeds. The water was unnaturally still, not a ripple in sight. Then, at the edge of his vision, just beyond the tall green stalks, something moved. A shadow, dark and long, sliding across the water. At first, he thought it was the reflection of the boat, but no. The shadow didn't match. It was moving against the current, sliding through the reeds with purpose. He froze, his hand stilling on the reel. It wasn't a fish. No, it was too big to be a fish. And it wasn't an animal either. At least not any animal he recognized. Carl swallowed hard, feeling his pulse quicken. He glanced at the rod in his hands. His line hadn't moved, but that shadow, it was still there, darting between the reeds, just at the edge of his sight. He shook his head. It was nothing. It had to be nothing. Maybe a tree branch or some debris caught under the water's surface. But his instincts told him otherwise. This wasn't normal. This wasn't nature. The shadow stopped moving. It lingered just behind the reeds, out of his direct line of sight. But Carl could feel it, watching, waiting. Then, with a sudden, unnatural clarity, the shadow moved again, this time toward the boat. Carl's heart leapt in his chest. His first thought was to start the motor to get away, but his hands betrayed him. They wouldn't move. It was as if the boat had been frozen in place, as if something held it, anchored it to the water. The shadow emerged from the reeds, closer now, closer than it had been before. It was dark, too dark for something as mundane as a fish. It had shape, but it was wrong. Jagged, twisting, like a stain on the water itself. Carl felt the coldness of dread seep into his bones. He tried to turn the engine, but the motor sputtered, as if it too had been paralyzed. His eyes were fixed on the thing emerging from the water. A shape, a thing. It wasn't human, but it wasn't animal either. It had long, unnatural limbs, thinner than they should be, dragging against the water, disturbing it in slow, deliberate movements. The air around him grew thick with the smell of damp earth and something far worse, something rotten. His breath caught in his throat as the shadow broke free of the reeds. It rose slowly, impossibly tall. The water rippled beneath it, but it didn't seem to touch the surface. The shape hung above the lake, suspended in the air like some grotesque apparition. Its limbs were thin, almost skeletal, and as it rose higher, Carl saw the jagged, broken features of a face. Not a face, really more like the suggestion of one, as though something had once been there, but time, or whatever it was, had worn it away. The thing's eyes were empty, hollow, but Carl could feel them, pinning him, like they were digging into his very soul. It didn't move quickly. It didn't need to. The thing simply hovered there, over the water, casting a shadow that seemed to reach out, stretching toward the boat. Carl couldn't look away. He couldn't even blink. Then, a sound. A soft crackling, like dry leaves being crumpled. The thing's mouth opened, impossibly wide, wider than any mouth should be able to go. And inside, Carl saw something shifting, something large and dark, like a storm of shadows swirling inside it. It was as if the creature was nothing more than a shell, a vessel for something far worse inside. The boat rocked gently, as though caught in a distant current. Carl's heart thudded painfully in his chest as his gaze locked with the thing's hollow eyes. He had to move. He had to get away. But his body refused to obey. The shadow in the creature's mouth grew larger, darker, as though it were reaching out for him. A slow, creeping sensation crawled up his spine, an unnatural cold that gripped him tighter than fear ever could. He wanted to scream, to cry out for help, but his voice was lost in the thick, oppressive air. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the shadow receded, sinking back into the depths of the lake with a soft, disturbing splash. The thing followed, moving slowly, deliberately, as though it had no hurry. Carl didn't wait to see where it went. His hand shot to the motor, desperately trying to restart it. This time it roared to life. Without a second thought, he gunned the engine and sped away, his eyes fixed on the shore in the distance. But as he turned, a movement caught his eye, a small flicker at the edge of the reeds. It wasn't gone, not by a long shot. It watched from the reeds, and Carl would never forget the feeling of those hollow eyes, fixed on him, as he fled the lake.